Assalamu alaikum. We welcome Ustadha Zaynab Ansari, who has been a member of the core faculty of the Taysar Seminary and Women's Scholar in Residence since 2014, originally from Atlanta. She relocated to Knoxville to take on the pioneering role for the Muslim community as a full-time instructor at Taysir Seminary. Ustadha Zainab teaches courses in Islamic law, Quranic sciences, and Quranic exegesis and prophetic biography, American Muslim history, women in Islam, and reading and interpretation of Arabic texts. Alhamdulillah, and she has served on the staff of other institutions, including the Boston Islamic Seminary and also the Jannah Institute prior to her joining the Taysar Institute. And alhamdulillah, she has been blessed to have studied in the Middle East, spending her formative years in Damascus, where she was introduced to the foundation of traditional Islam, and as well as Middle Eastern studies, and alhamdulillah, enrolled in Georgia State University, where she focused on interdisciplinary studies in the humanities with an emphasis on the history of the Middle East. And we welcome Ustadha Zainab Ansari to our interview. Basically, we just wanted to look at beyond the election and where do we go from here. That's going to be the theme for today. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Imam Nadim, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Alhamdulillah. And, I know this has been an interesting environment for Muslims and not yet Muslims alike. And, we want to just look at what you see as the most pressing issue, specifically for not only the African American Muslims, but just the Muslim community in general regarding the election, particularly the top of the ticket. What are some of your thoughts and observations?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah Ta'ala, most gracious, most merciful. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi taslima. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to shower His blessings and peace upon Prophet Muhammad and his family and his companions and all those who follow them. Ameen. So this is a critical question, and I want to preface my remarks by sharing with our esteemed Imam Nadim and our audience members that I am not a political activist. As you gleaned from my bio, I spend the vast majority of my time teaching the classical Islamic sciences. However, in the course of doing that type of work, I always like to make connections between our Islamic tradition and the principles that inform that tradition and the circumstances in which we find ourselves as American Muslims. And I believe that the American Muslim Ummah is uniquely positioned to have perhaps an outsized impact on this election, this upcoming presidential election. In my view, Imam Nadim, the most pressing issue is the issue of Gaza. This is something that I feel very strongly that we as a community need to unite around this, because this is not just sort of this idea of being single issue voters, but it is the realization that the entire foreign policy of the United States has really revolved around propping up this basically settler colonial state in the Middle East that has usurped the rights of the Palestinians for the better part of a century. And I think recognizing that reality and putting pressure on elected officials by voting or withholding certain votes, I think is the most pressing issue. It absolutely is what's happening in Gaza, which is a genocide.
And then it's been very painful for many Muslims, as you mentioned, the whole issue of single issue voting, and again, we don't want to just synthesize what's going on into Gaza just as a single issue. It is a humanitarian crisis, as stated. It is a genocide, and when those words are used, people tend to get defensive, and so what, from an Islamic perspective, what are some of the ways outside of the voting non-committed, which had happened specifically during the primary? What are some of the other ways that, as Muslims, we can organize around issues such as Gaza, because it's not going to be, I mean, we have Gaza, we have Sudan, we have, Congo, we have so many different issues that impact, our community. And so, if we wanted to use Islamic principles in organizing, because we're in a majority, not yet Muslim society, what's some of the advice that you would offer?
The advice that I would offer, Imam Nadim, is just what you have identified there, the interconnectedness, this idea of kind of intersectionality, I think it applies, I think, in a very kind of immediate sense to what is happening, because what is happening in Gaza is also, it's not isolated. As you've noted, we have an ummah that is suffering. And in terms of Islamic principles, I am reminded, Imam Nadim, of the teaching of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam around the concept of this ummah and the empathy that we have and the concern that we have for the entire ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for me, a guiding principle is the idea that all of us are connected, and we are connected whether we live here in the United States, whether we live in Asia, whether we live in Africa, whether we live in the global north or the global south, that all of us are connected by this ethic of compassion. And I think that's what really distinguishes the I think that's what distinguishes the ummah, the Muslim ummah, and that's what distinguishes the American Muslim ummah, and I think the American Muslim voter, that we're not just voting or organizing, because I think the question was about kind of organizing. We're not just kind of organizing around immediate political expediency, but we're organizing around this teaching of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And that is the hadith where he said, it's from the companion An-Nu'man ibn Bashir. It's agreed upon, meaning in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, very strong hadith, that the companion An-Nu'man ibn Bashir narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the believers in their mutual kindness, compassion, and sympathy are just like one body. When any limb of it aches, the whole body aches because of sleeplessness and fever. So, and I have to remind myself of this too when I'm posting about Gaza, which I do quite a bit. Well, what about Sudan? What about Syria? What about Somalia? What about Kashmir? What about the Uyghur Muslims? What about the Congo? What about our brothers and sisters in humanity? And again, I think this is what sets us apart from other voters, perhaps, because I've seen sentiments out there, Imam Nadim, that are very dismissive. Basically, the idea of this is their problem, not mine. And we know as an ummah, collectively, this is the responsibility of all of us. If I can give you a quick anecdote to kind of,
Good. Take your time.
inshallah, so I was blessed to travel to Istanbul with a school group after not having been in that beautiful country, Turkey, for decades. I went with my parents as a small child, and subhanallah, it was just I felt, Imam Nadim, that there was something really bittersweet, because it's like you're in a center, like going to Istanbul, like you're in this historical center of Muslim political power, yet the vestiges you see are kind of, they're tourist attractions, and people are
Mhm.
coming and snapping
Taking
photos
pictures. Yeah.
and enjoying themselves. And that was very bittersweet, because it's like you're reminded of a time when Muslims had this compassion, had this concern, had this efficacy, they got things done. And now you're visiting the same city where all these beautiful buildings and in many ways are like museums. So I share that to share with our community that's viewing this, that we need to consider how we can restore aspects of Muslim political power and Muslim political unity, so that those are not just concepts that are kind of placed, within the walls of a museum.
It's important because if you look at specifically the Ottoman Empire, up into the 20th century, they were significant, and that's and so it's not theory. You know, having an Islamic a political entity that is influential in the whole world, whereas was the British concept of divide and conquer has is still coming into play in this century, for the most part. So and as a significant part of the Ummah in this country, we have to join hands, and that's some of the things we have to look at. One of the things Donald Trump did when he first got into office was he established a Muslim ban, and so Allah knows best what is going to happen if he should win. But either way, whether Kamala wins or Donald wins, what advice would you give Muslims as to how we are to manage? I'm in Frederick Douglass mindset where he says that power concedes nothing without a demand. Nothing never has, and never will. And just wanted to get your insight as to no matter who wins, twiddly dee or twiddly duck.
Thank you, Imam Nadim. And let me issue this disclaimer for our esteemed viewers that the views that I am presenting are my own, and I'm
Mhm.
not speaking on behalf of Taysir Seminary or any
Understood.
organization with which I have an affiliation. But I have given a lot of thought to this, and I will say that the rise of Donald Trump in 2016 really prompted me to become a card-carrying Democrat when I never was. And subhanAllah, I think the mistake that I made, because I want to own up to my mistakes, I think the mistake that I made was believing that somehow the success of the Muslim community resided in aligning ourselves with what I thought was this progressive left that was paying some
Mhm.
lip service to inclusion and diversity and so on. And then I think that a lot of us feel this way. We voted for Biden, and we received in return a genocide against our fellow brothers and sisters. So I don't have quite the loathing that I used to have for Donald Trump, to be very honest with you. And by the way, I am not endorsing him whatsoever as a candidate. I will never vote for him, ever. Um, to me, that's just sort of unconscionable. And
He
it's
couldn't even win mayor of New York. you
uh,
know, he
yes.
couldn't. He couldn't even win mayor of New York,
Exactly,
in my
exactly.
opinion. Hmm.
And to me, it's equally unconscionable to vote, for Harris. But what I will say is that I know that the kind of specter of a Donald Trump presidency is frightening for a lot of our dear brothers and sisters. And I know that he's made a lot of threats, which I think are probably not just bluster. I think that if he wins office or convinces himself that he's won office or whatever he manages to do, I think that he is going to try to implement some draconian policies. But I would remind my brothers and sisters of the very simple reality of something that we utter every single day, which is Allahu Akbar, وَلَلَّهِ الْحَمْدِ, and وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ الْعَلِيِّ الْعَظِيمِ. That if we are spending our days invoking the greatness of Allah Ta'ala, saying that Allah Ta'ala is greater than anything and anyone, and praising God, and declaring that there is no power nor might save with Allah Ta'ala, we have to be able to translate that statement into something that by which we can live, so that we are not kind of like cowering in fear at the specter of a Trump presidency. I know there are going to be people who disagree with me, but I will say this, Imam Nadim, we survived a previous term under Donald Trump, and it was not Trump that gave us a genocide. It was the genial Democrat, Uncle Joe, yeah, that gave us a genocide, one that he is proud of, that he stated many, many times that he has gone above and beyond to give Israel what it wants. So that would be my message to our American Muslim Ummah. I understand that nobody wants to see Donald Trump back in office, but if he does go back into the White House, I also want us to consider that when Allah Ta'ala places certain people in charge, sometimes that is sort of an indicator of the health of that civilization. And I believe that we are seeing the last days of the American empire.
Hmm. And that's what you hear people say, the saying, people get the leadership that they deserve. And so, if we have not been conscious and considerate of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then He will place people in leadership that are reflective of that lack of consideration. What about, I remember going to some of the marches in Washington and different places. And there's a group, and even local here in Atlanta, Jewish Voices for Peace. And they've been aligning with Muslims and Palestinian groups, to stand out against the Zionist entities in the Jewish community. And well, what are some other alliances that, as Muslims, specifically African American Muslims, that we can form to basically combat this issue?
SubhanAllah, this is something that I've been thinking about for quite a while in terms of which alliances make sense for our community. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I feel that we invested a lot of time, in sort of alliances or partnerships, dialogue with various interfaith groups, with perhaps kind of governmental entities and so on. And I don't really know what the return has been, for our community. So I would really kind of invite us to think about who are those groups that are consistent in terms of their sort of application of principles, of uplifting the most oppressed, the most marginalized. And when I say that there's consistency, what I mean by that, Imam Nadim, is not just someone that wants to use the members of our community for a photo
Tokenized.
op, exactly for a photo op or some kind of like feel good conversation about commonalities amongst the religions and what have you. I think that we're kind of past that, that I want to see alliances with people and organizations that understand the the very serious impact of our foreign policy on multiple communities and societies abroad, as well as the very real suffering that we see here in the United States. I think there's a lot of work that we have to do to be able to kind of allow us to see the connections between what is happening overseas, the marshaling of, again, all these resources to support this genocidal entity, and at the same time taking away resources from communities here in the United States, whether it is African Americans, whether it's people in the Appalachia region, whether it's the Latino community, whether it's indigenous peoples. I would like to see more organizing there.
Yes, and it's important, for us to join with groups that are reflective of the ethics as Muslims as well. I think that's going to be an essential part. So you know,
Sure.
yes,
Yes.
and some of the things that we have to look at in regards to our takeaways, the importance of, one of the things that stuck out for me, what you said about the importance of us being a community of compassion, and quoting the hadith, and that's essential for us to be compassionate on our fellow human beings. I always tell people, I may be Muslim, but we're human. I'm a human first, and so we all bleed the same, and we all feel the same when we lose, and we suffer grief in so many different ways. So we have to tap into our common humanity, so that we'll be empathetic towards people who are suffering not only in Gaza but throughout the planet. And any final thoughts or advice that you would like to give the listeners,
Yes,
viewers?
I really I want to acknowledge the long-standing struggles and the sacrifices made historically by the African American Muslim community. And I think if I can offer this sort of unsolicited nasiha, I am concerned, Imam Nadim, that there are attempts by people who don't have our best interests at heart, i.e., people who are external to our
Mhm.
community, to play up these differences between the African American, the Black American Muslim community, and transnational or immigrant Muslims.
Mhm.
I think there is definitely an attempt to drive a wedge, and um, and I think that our enemies see the potential of our community, the impact that we can have on this election. They're looking at the level of sort of advocacy and how we were willing to put aside certain differences and unite around Gaza. And now you're kind of seeing different statements, different letters coming out, with one group saying we're going to take this position, another group saying we're going to take that position. And while I'm not going to question anyone's intention or aqidah, that's not my point of departure. I will say we need to be very, very careful, because I do believe that there is an effort underway to divide our community. And I would humbly request of those Muslims who want to support the Democratic ticket, we should ask ourselves, what have they given us in return? The Democrats have demonstrated that they can go and and commit a full-on genocide. A'udhu billah, they can commit a full-on genocide against the most helpless, defenseless civilian population, and they can throw us a few crumbs and we're still going to go and vote for them. So I really want to ask our brothers and sisters to reconsider that stance if that's what they're thinking about.
Yes, important piece of advice. And what about, as you mentioned, that Muslims have been aligning, whether Democratic or Republican, and there have been like some name calling and character assassinations. And one piece of advice I'd given a person, I said that, we can dissent, but, use decorum, and also maintain your Islamic adab, in how you dissent with one another, as opposed to going into the gutter. So I just wanted to, maybe if you can offer a piece of advice about the best way to, basically engage in discussions of dissent without descending into name calling and character assassination.
Absolutely. And, I get that tempers are running high and we have very strong views of this, but I think to call people munafiqeen or put them outside of the faith, again, we need to be extremely careful. Now, if you want to discuss Imam Nadim maybe another time about how some of these folks overseas, these so-called Muslim rulers, and yes, I have some
Hmm.
very strong views about these people and their agenda. But sort of
Hmm.
internal to our Muslim community, even though I might disagree with some political stances, I think we just need to be careful about some of the language. But I'll share this ayah in the Quran. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna Allaha ya'muru bil 'adli wal ihsan wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkar wal baghi ya'idukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. And this is chapter 16, verse 90. Indeed, Allah commands justice, grace, as well as generosity to close relatives, and forbids indecency, wickedness, and aggression. He instructs you, so perhaps you will be mindful. I think that we might want to tamp some of that language down, if we are going to sort of appeal to um, uh, hopefully the better kind of inclinations of our brothers and sisters.
I mean, thank you, Ustadha Zaynab Ansari, for joining us on Beyond the Election. Where do we go from here? We thank you for your valuable time, and may Allah again allow you to continue to grow and flow in your work, and inspire the students that you're teaching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Amin wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you. Jazakallah khair, Imam Nadim. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Alhamdulillah.
I'm
Wa
not,
yakum.
I'm the least qualified to have anyone to speak.
Oh no.
Thank you for inviting
Well,
me.
I'm just honored, your father and I, we did a show together called Muslim Vibe, and so I'm just happy to be able to, talk to another generation of Ansari. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. He was so fond of you, Imam Nadim. So, please
Mhm.
always keep him in your dua,
We always.
MashaAllah, you and Mr. Mu'min are like pioneers of Islam in America. So I'm very humbled. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
wa alaikum barakatuh. Thank you.
The time has come for African American Muslims to come together to drive action. We realize that one person alone cannot find answers to the unique needs of the Black community. But when we put it in the hands of our community, it can pave the way for progress and address our issues. At MANA, we are committed to working together to make America a country where justice, equality, and righteousness reign, and the legacy of Islam lives on. We are driven by a passion to serve and the desire to strengthen African American Muslim communities. Let's come together and raise our collective voice to address our community's issues. This is the perfect time to join the MANA Network to address issues that seek solutions. We joined with other organizations in a historic project to assess the state of the African American Muslim community. Go to manajustice.org to learn about the results and to join the MANA Network.